Hello, this is Alexandra Talty, environmental journalist, here with South Fork Sea Farmers, sharks off our shore sharing the water. I'm here with Dr. Bradley Peterson of Stony Brook University and Captain Matt Berkhout of the SoFo Sharks Research Program. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for giving us an opportunity to share.
And so I feel like this summer, sharks have been a big topic. I'm sure you guys get asked a lot of questions about it. Can you share a little bit about this place where we live that happens to be, one of the largest juvenile grounds for sharks, as well as what kind of species that people can expect to see on Long Island or the South Shore?
Yeah, so we live essentially on the South Shore of Long Island, and so that's a part of the New York Bight, which is the greater area. And so that's essentially a triangle that connects Cape May, New Jersey to New York City to Montauk, and then a straight line through there. And so that triangle is really the area that we're hoping to study and better understand. And you're right on the money when you say that we've got a really diverse collection of species here that are using it as a nursery ground. And so the sharks that we see during the season are lots of different species and often juveniles and even newborns.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that SoFo's claim to fame for Long Island is demonstrating that the South Shore of Long Island is a juvenile white shark nursery and only one known in the Atlantic. So it's in a critical place for them. Other institutions have demonstrated that we have a sand tiger nursery, and there's some question that it may also be nurseries for other sharks, perhaps the duskies as well.
And so, Captain Matt, you have Stay Salty Ventures, as well as chartering the SoFo Shark boat. Can you share a little bit about your experience with tagging sharks?
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. So what we do is we work with the South Fork Natural History Museum. We work in collaboration also with Stony Brook University and the Peterson lab in SOMAS. And our job is essentially to go out and find sharks, often of very specific species. So we're not just looking to go out and go shark fishing and see whatever we catch. We're generally targeting one species at a time in any given day. And the goal is to essentially capture the animals with as little stress as possible, bring them to the boat, keep them in the water the whole time, essentially do a health assessment and workup where we're taking measurements, we're taking some biological samples that can be brought back to the lab for analysis, and then we send them swimming away, if it's the right species, with one of any number of different tags that we can put in them, depending on the species we get and what questions we're looking to answer with regards to that species. And that allows us to start to, again, answer some questions based on the way that they're using our resources. And so the whole goal is to better understand how sharks are using our local habitat.
This collaboration between SoFo and Stony Brook has worked out really extremely well. You're putting a bait in the water and you can't really, target exactly who's going to take that bait, right? And so although Stony Brook may only be interested in certain species, everyone that comes to the boat, is going to be worked up. Matt had mentioned some of these samples. I think it's kind of important to know why we collect what we collect, right? So every fish that comes to the water or to the side of the boat will do a size and girth measurement, so we have an idea of the size of the individual. We also take a fin clip, which gives us the ability to use genetics to perhaps look at kind of the population genetics along the coast of the US. We also take a muscle biopsy, and the reason we do that is so that we can get an idea of what they've been eating using stable isotopes to look at that. We also will take what they call a cloacal swab. What that means is that we take a really long sterile Q-tip and we stick it up where their anus is to get a fecal sample. And then we can use that sample and look at the genetics of it to kind of see what have they eaten within the last period of time, to look at kind of diet. And then what our lab has been doing is, if it's the right kind for us, we'll do a surgery. We'll cut it open, we'll put a acoustic receiver in it. And I guess the best way for you to think of that is it's kind of like a Easy Pass. Right, we put the Easy Pass inside the shark, and every time it goes by one of our sensors on the ground, it says, bing, I'm here. And then we stitch it up and we'll let it go. But certain sharks for SoFo will get a satellite tag, or they'll get these cool CAT scans. Can you explain that to them?
Absolutely. So the PSATs, they're called, they're pop-off satellite archival tags. And they spend typically 28 days on a shark. So after we affix it to the animal and release it, it swims around and it's constantly recording both temperature and depth. So during that time frame, we don't have a GPS location where exactly it swims. We'll know only where it starts and where it ends. But the real beauty of that tag is it allows us to analyze the depth profile. So are they using the surface waters? Are they spending most of their time on the bottom? Are they transiting quickly through the middle, or do they live in that middle of the water column? And so this is one of the things that we think might be really helpful in helping to make some decisions and help protect people in ocean activities while they're bathing. Certain sharks are in certain locations at certain times and at certain water temps, and that might help guide us in the future to understand where the sharks are and where they might or when we might be most likely to encounter them as a surfer, paddleboarder, or swimmer.
And before, because I think that is one of the biggest questions. I'm an emergency responder on the ocean, and I get asked about sharks all the time. I'm sure you do. There's a lot of fear. Before we dig into that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the tagging, because I know the Peterson lab, you guys have been really innovative in trying to develop ways of tagging sharks that give them less stress.
Yes.
What have been the innovations in that, and then also, what's the experience of tagging a shark? Because that does sound scary to me.
So the scary part is not the tagging. The scary part, in my mind, is when they have the shark.
Saw?
Well, no, well that's scary too. But so imagine you've got a hook. You're the captain. You should be given this, right? You got hook on, right? And they're
Fish on.
bringing it up to the side of the boat, and then someone's going to grab that steel leader. And what you need to do is you need to get a tail rope around the tail. And so that's the scary part is getting the tail around the leader, getting it cinched up and pulling it tight so that you can hold the animal tight and put it upside down, because then it basically goes into kind of catatonic, sleep, settles down. And so the scary part is getting that tail rope on. And Greg Metzger, who's one of the other captains, the lead field coordinator, we do all of our training on the tail rope for one species. Which species is it?
The thresher shark.
Because those thresher sharks are terrifying with their tail. And so we have to be very, very careful and very good at getting the tail rope on so that nobody gets hurt. And we all practice for the threshers.
So each shark presents its own challenge. So for me, you mentioned white sharks. That's one of the things that we're most interested in from the museum standpoint. A white shark has the most intimidating mouth of all of the sharks. And so I'm the very fortunate person as the captain who not only gets to leader the shark around and serve him up for someone to put a tail rope on, but I'm also de-hooking and releasing the shark.
Oh no.
And so my wife particularly loves seeing the videos of me with my hand and a pair of pliers removing the hook from the mouth. Ideally, we get the hook out because we would rather not impact the animal long term. And so that's goal number one. And so for the white shark, the scariest part is the release. As Dr. Peterson pointed out, for a thresher shark, it's very different. A mouth on a 12-foot animal is about the same size in a thresher shark as you would find in a 4-foot great white. And so for comparison, the great white's mouth is its greatest advantage in evolutionary adaptation, while the thresher shark has a tail. And so they're not actively doing their hunting with their mouths. They swim up to large schools of fish, and because they're essentially their length distribution, 50% of it is tail. So if you have a 6-foot body on a thresher shark, then you have 6 feet of tail. And so as that thing comes up to the side of the boat, if your job is to tail rope it, your instinct is to lean over, reach out, get around that leader, as Dr. Peterson described before, clip it and cinch it tight. But now you're leaning over and you're 2, 3, 4 feet from an animal that's got a 6-foot whip. And the crack of a thresher shark sounds like an Indiana Jones whip, and it is intimidating. So you look at it, it looks floppy when it's in the water and it's swimming around, and then all of a sudden you touch it, or you hear it hit the side of a fiberglass boat, and you recognize that it is a tremendous threat. And so thresher sharks have this tail that they whip around, and so that's why we train with the threshers in mind, and that makes everything else a little easier. But no shark is as simple as you would imagine it. So blue sharks love to roll, and they're the one species that is capable of actually bending around and biting their own tail. So even at the complete posterior of the animal, you're as far away from the mouth as you could be. In under a second, it can bend around and take a bite. So it's exciting. It's definitely a little dangerous, but it gives you a little rush, and that's kind of part of the fun.
I don't think anyone thinks that shark tagging is easy. I'm just gonna say that right now.
If it were easy, everyone would do it, right?
Yeah. Actually, so I asked some followers on social media some questions, and one question that came up was how fast is a thresher shark's tail, or how fast can they go?
I'd really rather not try to put numbers to it.
Okay.
Anecdotally, it's lightning fast when they decide to use the tail, and there's no doubt that they're targeting that too. So sometimes you'll see a thresher swim through a school of fish, particularly a bunker pod, and you see them just slapping their tails on the surface, and that's because there's bait everywhere. But there's no doubt that they can target that and actually aim for what they're looking to strike. And so, when we're on the boat and we have people who are not critical to the actual tail roping process, on my boat, I've got a hard top with a metal frame. Captain Metzger's boat has a pilot house. And so anybody who's not critical for that specific process is up in the front and protected by a frame on a boat, because when that tail comes out, you're not going to see it coming. It's fast enough that you don't have warning. You don't know it's coming unless you know that a thresher shark is just going to get you if you don't give it a chance. But
I have no idea how fast they are, but the really amazing thing about the thresher sharks is when they're hooked, they can completely jump out of the water, and they're magical to watch. You had mentioned earlier about kind of innovative in the tagging things. One of the things again, through the SoFo collaboration, we work with a vet, Harley Newton. And so Harley has trained us all to draw blood, and we basically look at some of the blood chemistry, and they can use that as to understand the stress. And so while we are going through all of this, we're collecting data also from the blood to see how much stress the animal's going through in this process. And I think that, one of the things that we want to know is how we can do this most efficiently for the animal.
And with the data that you guys are, using and furthering this whole world of shark research, what have been some of the surprising insights, both from the perspective of safety of bathers, but also, to understand sharks more? They are one of the more mysterious animals.
From my lens, what I find to be the most surprising thing is shocking to your typical bather who has a fear of the ocean and sharks. And that is that we can go out to sea and chum the waters heavily for 8 hours straight with perfectly presented baits, and we do everything we can to bring them in, and you can go 8 hours and not see a single shark. And we're doing everything we can to attract them to us, and we fail to do that on a, unfortunately, pretty regular basis. And I think that's not something that the typical person in the public would imagine, because you hear, a shark can smell a drop of blood from a mile away. And that may be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that even if they smell it, they are going to come directly to you, because you're not the only fish in the sea, essentially. Your chum is not the only attractive thing that they can smell. And so they're making some conscious decisions about what direction they head. And we are looking and chasing sharks consistently and more often than not failing. And so realistically, regardless of the fact that we've got over 100 sharks for the season as a team, there are plenty of days that no matter what we do, we can't get them near us. And so it's not a statistical probability that if you enter the water, you're going to encounter a shark. And it's certainly not a statistical probability that you are going to encounter a shark in a negative way. And so that's the thing that I found most surprising through my years, that every time we get blanked or skunked on a fishing trip, a little more confidence for me to go in and continue surfing or paddling and being in the water with my 2-year-old.
And Dr. Peterson, we were talking earlier about, 4th of July, there have been these big incidences this summer. And, what's your take on this as a scientist?
So I think that there's a few things that we need to kind of keep in mind. A lot of people come to me and they ask, why do we have, more sharks now than we have in the past, right? I'm not sure that we actually have more sharks now than we have in the past. I think, and again, there's been a couple kind of, is it because the climate's changing and things are coming up from the south, right? Is it because, there's more food available at the shore, particularly bunker? And, again, I think that there are potential reasons, and if I had to bet, my bet would be that we're seeing that the sharks are gravitating towards the prey, and the prey, when it's moved onto shore, is more likely to come into contact with us. And so I think that we see the predators chasing prey closer to where the people currently are when the bunker are present. But I guess I want to be clear is one of the things is we catch dusky sharks in 20 feet of water, a baseball throw away from the shore, and we catch them in 75 feet of water, 3.5 miles away from shore. And so they're following kind of their prey. And another thing to kind of think about this, if you're a predator and you want to be successful, you want to do everything you can to be successful, and driving your prey into shallower and shallower water makes it less likely for them to get away from you. And so we can kind of see them moving into that. And so when we think, again, thinking about what's happened on Long Island for the last 2 years, right? There have been 12 negative shark interactions in the last 2 years. Of those negative shark interactions, there's only been 3 or 4 where the individual's actually gone to the hospital for stitches. There was one this year that was a significant event closer to the city there. But even in that event, the shark spit out what had been removed from the person. So it wasn't like they were trying to eat them and consume them as a man-eater. So we need to kind of put that in perspective in the sense that on July 4th this year, there was a beautiful weekend. The sun was out. There were probably hundreds of thousands of people standing in the water on the beaches of Long Island. And, we had 2 negative shark interactions.
I think the statistical probability is probably something that makes people feel a little bit better, because it is. But I've heard people say that the reason why, like that, the media pretends that this happens on July 4th to sell papers. But I feel like the fact that there's 1 million people in the water on July 4th is probably why these things are happening. Another thing that I've always wondered about is the bunker have come back inshore more. We have sharks. We're seeing more from the shore, as well as whales and dolphins. Does all of this point to a healthier ecosystem?
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an ecologist or a biologist in general who's going to say that the presence of apex predators is a bad sign. They essentially help to manage the populations beneath them in the food chain. They prevent overpopulation of any one specific animal in the ocean, and I'm glad you pointed out that it's not just sharks. So we recognize being on the water all the time. Now, I'm not sure that there's good scientific data to prove at this point that the bunker numbers really are greater or that they're spending more time inshore, but I'm not sure that you need a peer-reviewed journal to see it day to day. And so that science will come out, but science takes time. The peer review process is not remarkably fast, and so to be in this season and talk to my fellow fishermen and bathers at the beach, and it seems pretty widely accepted that there just is more bait here. And so once we recognize that, we shouldn't be surprised to see more sharks, but also more dolphins and more whales. And so if you're on the water or you're following social media, it is really easy to see that there is quite a bit of bait around. And so since I'm mentioning social media, I think it's also important to point out that there's a greater effort than ever before. This one I am very confident about. There's a greater effort than ever before to observe, record, and share. And so the fact that these social media platforms exist as an opportunity to share what you've seen, as they have never existed in the past, we may be seeing more, but we are definitely, or I should say, there may be more, but we are definitely seeing more. And so to parse out how much of it is greater numbers of bunker, dolphins, whales, and sharks versus more people recording it and posting it and making it available, that's a really difficult thing to do. And again, the science will follow. We'll have our chance to actually collect the data and publish it, but that's going to take time. In the meantime, what I like to do, or what I think is best for me to do from a scientific perspective, is only share direct observations. And I can tell you that in my 30 years of fishing, I've never seen bunker like this. I've never seen dolphins and whales like this. And that's my direct observation. That's all I can really speak to from that angle, but I'm hearing that a lot from people just like me. So while I think the science will come, I think we also have a responsibility to get this information out and share it with people and not necessarily wait till the ink dries on a scientific paper.
When do you think the science will show that the ecosystem has rebounded or this
So
is
there,
possible?
there's been there's concerted effort right now, particularly to address the issue of bunker. I myself have gotten in trouble by saying there's more bunker on the South Shore of Long Island, because, from a population of bunker along the East Coast, the population size may not have significantly changed, but there might be more off of Long Island. They may have just kind of up here more. And, there's been efforts to decrease the harvest of bunker, which would lead, one would think, to their population growing. But I don't have the numbers, and so I've gotten in trouble from that. But I think that, talking to anybody who spent the last decade on the water in Long Island, and to say to them, we don't have any more bunker off the South Shore of Long Island now than we did a decade ago, I think that they would laugh at you. I think that they would say, well, we've seen it, so what does that mean? So I think that there's a concerted effort to look at the prey. The sharks are a little bit more, complicated because they move so much, they migrate for such distances that it's hard to get an idea of kind of their population increase. Some species, it seems like some of them have grown, but sharks have taken a serious hit. Sharks, they have very low reproductive output, and so when they're fished, it's hard for their populations to respond. And so, I think that we need to just perhaps not think that the last thing that I would want to happen from your audience or from you would be to walk away from this to say, kind of like they did in the movie Jaws, that, the population of sharks are increasing, and what we need to do is go cull the herd. What we need to do is a concentrated effort to remove their numbers on the South Shore of Long Island because they're a threat to humans. I think that would be the absolute worst outcome that we could have from this kind of a discussion.
Well, and I have a colleague working on the global shark fin trade, doing this like big investigation, and it's really interesting because I think here, we're getting fearful. There have been these more attacks like on Cape Cod. People think it's going to start happening here. Big picture, what's happening to sharks globally, and why should we be worried about that?
Well, I mean, big picture, they are a species that is greatly endangered. Many species of sharks are, and they have a very low ability to rebound from this removal, and there's a very strong fishing pressure on them for most of the world. I had the great thrill of being able to go to the Solomons this last year, and there were places where certain countries had come in and basically removed every shark that had been present there for decades. And so again, I don't want people to leave with the thought that shark populations are growing so much that we need to have a impact on removing them. No, that's not the case. I think what we're seeing in Long Island is that we've had sharks here. Sharks remain here. We're entering their world when we go into the water, and they're doing their thing, which isn't really trying to mess with us. So if I had to give advice to someone who wants to go on the beach, right? If like they want to go out and spend their time on the beach, as I do with my family. So we walk into the water and we're having a great time. And if a school of bunker comes by, it's not like it's hidden.
No.
Right? You're seeing splashing at the surface and the fins are moving around. It's a dark cloud, right? Well, around that dark cloud, possibly are predators. One really fun thing is when a shark goes right through it, right? And you see this strip of water as they go through, right? So here I am with my little girl and I'm having fun on the beach and I see one of these cloud things come by. I might just step out of the water and watch them to see, hey, can I see anything around that bunker school as it moves along? And as soon as it goes by me, I'm just gonna go right back in with my little girl because I'm not these guys aren't chasing after me. They're going after their food. And I think when we look at the people who have had negative interactions on the South Shore of Long Island, it's been mistakes, right? They've bitten on and let go. And because that wasn't what they were looking for.
And if we're talking about swimming with schools of bunker, there's other predator like bluefish,
Yes.
I know a lot of people that have been bitten by a bluefish, and that is not
Absolutely.
something that gets as many headlines as shark. What are other kind of tips that you would have for beachgoers who are nervous about this?
So typically we advise that at dawn and dusk, that's typically when sharks appear to have the greatest hunting advantage in their ecosystem. And so typically it seems like their behaviors are more aggressive at that time because they're actively hunting rather than perhaps exploring or seeking water temperatures. They may be out of their comfort zone just to find food. And so typically don't swim at dusk or dawn. Certainly don't swim by yourself. Safety in numbers is true. No matter how fierce of a predator you are, there's a risk in every interaction you have with another organism. So whether you watch a cheetah chase an ostrich, no one thinks the ostrich is going to win the fight between a cheetah and an ostrich, but if the cheetah gets kicked in the mouth and breaks its jaw, it's going to starve to death. And so there's a risk there, even though the ostrich doesn't appear to be a really threatening animal. The same thing is true here. So when a shark comes near to a human being, we expect that it's not going to particularly want to engage with this organism because something as large as it is an inherent threat. And so being in numbers, what's better than being equal size to a predator? Lots of equal sized things for it to look at and decide, is this worth my risk? Should I chase the fish that's this big, or should I go for this thing I'm not really sure about that's way bigger? And so swimming in numbers is typically a good behavior. Try not to look like the fish that they're feeding on. And so several of these incidents, one of them I actually know one of the people involved off of Fire Island. They were surfing, and so the story is that his foot was flapping in the water, right? So he's straddling the board as a surfer. His foot is flapping, and what does the underside of a Caucasian individual's foot look like? It's 1 foot, it's white, and when it changes angles, it's going to get a little flash. And so if you watch a bunker pod, you're going to see them change angles and you're going to see a flash. And so if you're a predator that has evolved over hundreds of millions of years to successfully feed on fish that are 1 foot in flesh, you're probably quick to commit to that. And so this individual got a bite on the foot, was released. And so typically, again, don't be in the school of fish, but maybe be conscious of your body movement. So obviously surfing, if you're sitting on the board, that's kind of tough not to do. If you want to maintain your balance, your feet are going to move like that. But if you're not surfing, minimize your splashing, your waving, things that might be confused for a fish in a school or a threatened or injured fish.
And do these, so I surf, and a lot of people have been doing these, like painting a stripe on your board on the bottom. I know some people who have like the shark watches that emit a signal, not the watch company. What are your more scientific takes on these systems?
I don't know.
I feel like you guys have a secret answer.
To be 100% honest, I don't have a scientific take because I haven't seen data, right? So from a science perspective, it's really hard to say. If it makes you feel comfortable, let's just say this, I don't think that putting stripes on the bottom of a board, because just logically for me, I think of some other organisms that actually employ that as natural adaptations, right? So zebras have stripes on their boards. It breaks up the margins and makes it a little harder to recognize where the edge of an animal is, and that could be confusing, and so that might make a predator less likely to strike. On the other hand, maybe it makes it more likely to take, I can't figure it out from visually, maybe I should investigate. And sharks, much like infant children, don't really have a better way to investigate things. So, right, you're a newborn or a 2-year-old, I have one of those at home, you don't know what something is and you want to figure out as much as you can about it. Inevitably, in the first couple of minutes, it goes in your mouth. Now imagine that organism doesn't have hands. There is no play with it first, then put it in your mouth. So one of their best ways to investigate things is to put it in their mouth. So, that's something that we know, and we're making calculated decisions when we enter the water, understanding that particularly young animals have a lot to learn, and that's one of the ways they're going to do it. So to kind of get back to the point about shark bands, I don't think a watch that is emitting a signal is likely to be attractive to sharks, but I don't really know that it's working, but we can't know that. And so I would never tell somebody, oh, don't wear that, that's a bad idea, but I would be really hesitant as a scientist to say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, that's going to work, and spend your fortune on it.
One thing I think we need to keep in mind is that we use the term shark, but there are all different types of sharks. And we were talking about the thresher. Sharks are some have very different personalities than other species of sharks have. So one of the projects that we have that we're tagging sharks for is for the power cable coming in from wind farm, right?
Oh.
And in reading and investigating about the impact that these, the electromagnetic field from these cables might have on sharks, it was interesting that some sharks, it may be a deterrent. This electric field might be a deterrent. But other sharks, they tend to go after prey looking at that. So they might use those fields for for finding and determining prey. So each species of shark may react differently to that electromagnetic field, which makes me wonder about the shark watch or whatever, right? It may react differently for different species of sharks.
I'll just add that in the field, doing this research, one of the things we try to do as often as possible is get good footage, both to confirm an identification. When the boat is rocking in rough seas, with an animal trying to escape, and 100 things going on the boat, there's some pressure and it's intense, and so it's easy to miss things. So one of the things we like to do is document as much as possible to make sure that we don't make mistakes or refine our procedure to both protect people and animals. And repeatedly that involves sticking GoPros in the water, and we see that sharks show quite a bit of interest in GoPros, and so white sharks in particular like to bite GoPros. So,
Really?
Absolutely. And so this, again, is there data to show that white sharks do it more than others? No, but in my experience, I've seen it multiple times. And so maybe a GoPro on your head while body surfing is an attractive item. And again, without good science and a concerted effort to study that, we won't know for sure, based on data, but we see them bite.
So they go up to the GoPro.
And let's not mistake this. They don't only bite the GoPro. They will bite the boat's prop. They will bite the fiberglass itself. I have, from 2 weeks ago, I have a small fragment of a hammerhead tooth that actually bit my rub rail, and the tooth stayed in the rubber. And so again, a stressed animal that has been captured and sequestered, I don't blame it for taking a shot at other things. But it's really hard to say how an animal is going to perceive any given item, both in the wild and then especially during a capture release event. So a lot of these are questions that we would love to have better answers for. But overwhelmingly, as much of a tremendous pool of resources as we are dedicating to shark research, A, it's just a drop in the bucket for what there is to know. And B, as Dr. Peterson keeps pointing out, every shark species is different, and every shark within the species is different. And so some of the white sharks are really aggressive, and some of the white sharks, not so much. They're very docile. You'll roll them into tonic immobility, and they are chill. They are sleeping. And others, they don't give up till the very last second that you release them, and they fire off. And sometimes they like to come back around and give what I call the death roll. They do the death roll, they look sideways, and they got to get that eye up to the surface so they can see you. Like, oh, you with the red beard? I hope I see you again.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And so am I in their minds? No, but I've seen it happen several times. And other sharks want nothing to do with the boat. I'm getting out of here. And those are animals of the same species. And then across species, the behaviors are very different. That also speaks to the fact that our conservation efforts, some of them have been really successful with certain species and really not so successful with others. And so it's dangerous to paint them in a broad stroke and say sharks as a whole. They're all very, very different, both on the individual level as well as the species level.
There are many things that we would like to know more about sharks on the South Shore of Long Island. There are some research questions that we would like to go after and address, but that doesn't mean that we don't know much. And I think that education is one of the really important elements of this whole exercise, this whole entity. Other states, other countries, they have little pop-up tents on the beach that are educating the public, letting the public know, because there's an element right now in New York of trying to quell personal fear, right? We want people to feel safe. So, well, how are we going to do that? We're going to demonstrate that we're doing something. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we'll talk to lifeguards, helping them, maybe look for things to look for, right? We'll put
deploy drones, like
we'll have drones so you
Southampton Town
can see
has
the
a
drones
drone
over,
now,
right?
yeah.
We'll have helicopters flying out.
skis.
We'll have guys on jet skis. And some of that, I think, is more of an effort to quell public concern than perhaps designed to be able to detect whether or not there are sharks nearby and endangered. One of the things that we were talking about earlier was the use of drones. So the state has decided to purchase drones and put them up in the air to look for sharks to make sure that the beach is safe. Well, our water's not super clear. We don't live in the Caribbean, we don't live in Hawaii, and so the ability to see down into the water is somewhat limited off the South Shore of New York. And even when there is something in the water, looking at it from the top, there, a great example. Some of the people on your audience know what a cobia is. It's a prized fish. And you could throw a drone up and you could see cobia flying around the bunker and think that that's a shark, because it's a very much a profile looking sharky, but it's not. It's not a fish. And so, I think there's an element of needing to educate those people who are making those calls, the people looking at the drones, saying, oh, there's shark in the area. They don't need to know, is that a hammerhead or is that a black? They don't need to know. All they need to know is, am I looking at a shark or am I looking at a black drum?
Yeah, so we've seen a few cases just this summer where there have been misidentifications. And so whether it be a drone pilot who applaud the officials who are making an effort, that's valuable and really important. It would just be nice to see it done a little more scientifically. And with the training in advance. And so legally, to fly a drone as a municipality or a commercial business, you need a license to fly a drone. So you have to hire a licensed drone pilot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is a shark expert, much less a fisherman or someone who spends lots of time around fish, identifying fish. And so we've seen bluefin tuna misidentified as sharks, black drum misidentified as sharks, cobia misidentified as sharks. And so educating everybody, all the stakeholders, really becomes important, because the bathers should be educated as to how to recognize the signs, things to watch out for, maybe when and where to swim and where not to swim. The lifeguards, who are responsible for spotting, detecting, and choosing a response, close the beach or not. For how long do we close the beach? Is it for an hour? Is it 3 hours? Is it for the week? Someone has to make that call. And certainly, I don't see on most of these governmental agencies shark experts as part of the team during the decision making. And so, nor is that particularly easy to do, certainly. So it's not a knock on anybody, but it's just the unfortunate reality. And so educating the public, the bathers, the lifeguards, the decision makers, all of the above, really this top to bottom spectrum, helping people to both understand why the sharks are here, what they're doing here, and how to best deal with that. This is not a new problem in some places. California and Florida, namely, have been dealing with this issue a lot longer than us. Massachusetts now, as you mentioned, on the Cape, they're seeing much more shark activity than people are accustomed to. And so this is not a new game. We are now in New York very much drawn into it, and we'd like to see some targeted approaches, and it's great to spend the money on the problem, but we think education probably has the greatest bang for your buck. We can conduct all the research in the world. If we don't get the message out, then we wasted our time and our money. And so what the South Fork Natural History Museum really tries to do is it's a three-pronged approach. So research, outreach, and education. So if we can do those three things, actually get the information out that we're learning, and not pretend that we know everything, but use our direct observations, the published literature that we have available, and use that to help guide decision making. And whether it be, do I swim now? Do I swim later? Do I not swim today? Or where do we spend our resources and our money in the research and response? Those are all things that we're hoping education can really play a big part of.
I love the idea of having a shark expert at the beach to kind of quell some of these fears as well, because I think a lot of people watch things like Shark Week and think that they know everything, and it's all over the world, different kinds of sharks, and not getting into the kind of actual risk factors. To kind of go along with this thinking of education, can you guys share a little bit about the Balloons for Sharks program? I think that's very cool.
Yeah, so essentially, many people on Long Island are familiar with shark tournaments. So historically, the Star Island Shark Tournament is a tremendous one. There's Bayshore, there's a Mauritius one. There's shark tournaments everywhere. And the goal is to catch the biggest shark, bring it to the dock, weigh it in, and win a prize. And so we kind of tried to model that, but instead of killing sharks and getting a prize for that, let's do something that helps sharks as well as the ocean ecosystem at large. And so individuals enroll. There's an app, it's called Fish Donkey, and you enroll in the SoFo Balloons for Sharks program. And every time you collect a balloon, whether it be offshore 80 miles tuna fishing or walking the beach with your dog, collecting sea glass, whatever it might be, you collect a balloon, you take a picture, you document it, and it keeps a running tally throughout the month of July. It's typically the 1st to the 31st. And essentially the goal is collect as many balloons as possible, dispose of them properly, remove them from the ecosystem, and then win a prize. And so the grand prize is, you've heard some stories about shark fishing. A member of your audience or whoever might essentially sign up can win an opportunity to be a part of the shark tagging experience. And so we try as often as possible to get people who are not part of the direct team, not necessarily scientists or boat captains or shark fishermen in general, on the boat for the experience, touch a shark, see a shark, because we see that it really changes impressions and makes people feel a little differently, having chummed the water for 8 hours and only seen one, or maybe see a lot of sharks, but you see the way they behave and you realize that they're not this vicious thing, that it swims straight to a bait, like you think it's gonna slam it, and then it turns around and looks at it 5 times. And so getting people on the water is a really big part of what we do, and so that's one way we do it, is we give away a prize as a free shark trip to come with the team, and this is an active role people play when they come with us too. They don't just sit and watch. They're taking measurements. They're documenting. They're actually a part of the research team, and so that's we think it's really cool.
I had the joy of being with the winners from last year. So I was the surgeon on board, and they came out and they actually hooked the shark and got to see the whole tagging process. And as we were driving back, we picked up a balloon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it was great. You asked early on, what's the kind of the most amazing thing that you've seen? Well, I don't know, I've probably spent around 60 or 70 days on the water in the last 2 years offshore looking for sharks, and the number of balloons offshore is just astounding.
Mm-hmm.
Blows my mind.
Yeah, if you get a couple days of south wind, I'm sure you see it as a lifeguard washing up on the beach.
Yeah.
They come in from the entire open ocean and they're everywhere. And it's not one. Oftentimes you see the cluster of 40 balloons all tied together in one spot that, released inadvertently or intentionally, you never know. But strict rule in our household, we're having a birthday party, no balloons allowed. That'll be on Saturday, so no balloons allowed.
We had talked about educating the public, educating the one of the rules that I think is really unique and special about the SoFo Shark Group is I've been out on the boat a number of times when media have come out on the boat, or radio or whatever, and to see them actually see the shark, interact with the sharks, interact with the whole process, learn more about it. You have a special role. I'm here for a day. You're here all the time. And so the message that you are able to say is much greater than whatever I'm going to be able to say. And it's great to see that kind of interaction happen with on the boat through SoFo and pay dividends that go well beyond that one day out on the water with you guys.
No question.
I do think having more access to these because it's hard, these experiences are hard for the average person to have, and I think it would go a long way to making people feel more comfortable in the water with sharks. Do you guys have some favorite shark facts to share before we wrap up? I feel like you probably have a lot. Like something really surprising that the average person might not know about a species or sharks in general.
So I'll share one. We mentioned that the South Shore of Long Island appears to be a nursery ground. We were fishing particularly for white sharks. We mentioned that we try to target sharks by species depending on the question we're trying to answer at the time. And we went out, and it was a long day. It was like 14 hours in the water. But we caught and brought to the boat, or just visually saw, sharks of a newborn size. So for instance, I saw direct observation spinner sharks with an umbilical scar. And so unlike humans, we keep our belly buttons for life. A shark that will heal over and it'll disappear after about a year of life. And so we have good evidence to suggest that these are newborn sharks within the last calendar year. When we roll them over to put them to sleep in tonic mobility, we actually can see that umbilical scar on their bellies. And so we saw spinner sharks, dusky sharks, white shark, a mako that would have been a large football, 2.5 feet at most, newborn size. And so to see the diversity of animals that are breeding here, or at least spending their time as newborns, so it's really hard to say that whether they're breeding here, whether they're birthed here, or whether that happens somewhere else and then they swim here and spend their time here. But the real key, one of the keys for a nursery ground, is that the newborns are spending their time here foraging and trying to stay safe essentially from the larger sharks and their other big predators. To see that it's not just white sharks, which the SoFo Museum has demonstrated and documented, but lots of other species are here. And so the opportunity for research is tremendous, and it's cool to see so many very young animals, because for me, without data to suggest it, but anecdotally, so many young animals to me indicates that there's some hope on the horizon that more species of shark will continue to be successful.
And I thought that shark, like especially white sharks, we don't know a lot about their birthing or... So does that mean this could be a field of, is this a really exciting field of research?
Oh, I think so.
Oh, there are a lot of people who would love to answer those questions, and the hard part, as you mentioned, is it's really difficult to get the experience. To get on a boat and go shark fishing is remarkably expensive. You know, if you want to go out in Montauk and go shark fishing for a day, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, and so every boat trip costs money. And so if you don't know where these sharks are doing what they're doing, and you're blindly heading out into the ocean, don't expect great results. And so we're starting on a much smaller scale in a smaller region, obviously the New York Bight as a whole, but we're more focused on the South Shore of Long Island. We are hoping that some of the tagging data that we can collect, so I believe your tags are 10-year tags, right?
Yep.
So
Oh,
these
wow.
sharks will continue to be detected up and down the East Coast. I know one thing you didn't mention is the huge collaborative
That's
network.
great, yeah, well, thank you.
You know that, and I'm sure you can give more detail, but essentially, although Stony Brook manages like a dozen arrays or something like that.
So our lab has 105 acoustic receivers out. All of the artificial reefs for the state have receivers in enough of them so that you could look at the two-dimensional movement, and if they have a depth, so you can look at the three-dimensional. So we're interested in kind of like what types of structure are these animals attracted to and foraging on, and then we also have other ones that are kind of gated to the inlets, and that's just us. Then there's other labs at Stony Brook that have, you know, twice as many as we have. That's just Stony Brook off the South Shore of Long Island. But then Matt's talking about this collaborative of people who have been tagging animals and have receivers around the East Coast. So many of the animals that we tag end up going down to Florida, you know, and we can see them going down and then coming back up for the summer.
I think it's like the keys to New Brunswick, right?
Yeah.
So it's this tremendous network that we see where these animals are going. And so we're studying them now, as I mentioned, many of them juveniles, but 10 years from now, they may be behaving very differently. And so that may start to lead us to, you know, give us some clues as to maybe where they're breeding or where they're, you know, things that we may not know now. All in due time, there's a lot of exciting things to come out.
We've tagged probably about 70 dusky sharks in the last 2 years, and I've never seen an adult, right? The dusky
Wow.
sharks are 8-foot animals, right? 3 to 4 feet is about the size of the ones that we see.
On average, 3 to 4, 5 to 6 is a slammer. We were watching a video that Dr. Scommel from Massachusetts brought down with him of a shark tournament at a bayshore, and they were seeing 300 and 400 pound animals consistently in the dusky species. And so we were looking at going, is that really a dusky? We
Right,
couldn't believe
right.
it. But we're hoping that these animals we're tagging now will grow to that size and we'll get to learn something from them.
And Dr. Peterson, I wanted to ask you, I was looking at some of the names like Leroy or Hurricane Margaret. Do you have any favorite sharks?
Yes, okay, and I'll tell you why. So I was just mentioned about these receivers that we have on the artificial reefs. So last year, one of my PhD students, Brittany Sclennell, and I, we have to go down and unscrew and swap out the receivers, right, to get the data. And so we go down, and of course, these are like 80 feet, and you can probably see three or 4 feet, and it's dark. And we pick up the receiver, and go up onto the boat, we download the data, and on that day, Whitaker, which is about a 13-foot great white shark, had been on that structure or within 300 meters of that structure 6 minutes before we took the receiver off. So if you can go online and you can follow, it's one of Greg Squammel's tagged adults. So I like to periodically say, well, where's Whitaker?
Your bestie.
Yeah, right, exactly. We hang.
Do you have any favorite
Yeah,
sharks?
you mentioned one of them, and the other one, so my very first white shark ever was, we named him Salty Sailor. So both of them, as you mentioned before, my charter is Stay Salty Inc. And so the salty piece came from that because we're on the radio all day. Stay salty, 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 salty. So one of the grad students who was writing her paper based on her research said, you gotta name it Salty something. And I picked Sailor because both of my grandfathers were Navy men. So that was an easy, put it together. Salty Sailor was my first one. And then Hurricane Margaret, you mentioned. My dad is a retired New York City fireman, and he was working in Engine 298 Hillside Hurricanes was their nickname in Jamaica, Queens. So that day we couldn't get anyone to fish. Now this sounds crazy. You mentioned it's really hard to get an experience on a shark boat. Some days you just can't get someone to come. It's too short notice. The weather window opens and people have jobs, people have things to do. And so my dad came out. He's typically a mate for me. We had the best luck on white sharks with him. And to get a third, he brought one of his firemen from his firehouse out, and we caught this white shark. It was the only one of the season, and so we wanted a hurricane. But when I said to my dad, you reeled it in, it's really your shark, we wouldn't have been able to come without you, you have to name it. He said, I gotta name it Margaret after your mom. And so he said, we can't just go Margaret, like Hurricane Margaret. The Hillside Hurricanes are here, Mom is here, put it all together. And, so those are my two favorite sharks, Salty Sailor and Hurricane Margaret.
Oh, that's really cute. And, as we wrap up this episode, what are kind of the things that you hope people, obviously education, don't be scared of sharks. What would be the big kind of picture that you want to leave viewers with?
Thinking of what's happened, kind of the feeling of the beaches in Long Island for this last summer and the summer before. Long Island is spectacularly beautiful. We live in a beautiful place. And I think that the idea of being afraid of going in the water and closing beaches, this is not where we are right now in Long Island. And I just would want to soothe people's fears. We need to increase our education, but the thought that it's too dangerous to get in the water in Long Island is just not true.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, there's no question that you're at greater risk on the LIE or William Floyd Parkway, or you name your heavily trafficked road. There's more risk of you being injured or killed on the road than it is swimming in the ocean. And so we don't even think about getting behind the wheel of the car. And oftentimes that was true before people were texting and driving like crazy. And so we don't think about the risks we often take day to day, minute to minute, and yet there is this tremendous fear of the ocean. And so as much as I encourage people not to be fearful of it, just be aware. Keep your head on a swivel. Look around. As Dr. Peterson mentioned, a school of fish moves through. Now's a great time to eat your peanut butter and jelly. You see dolphins and whales coming in. Well, maybe you didn't see the bait fish, but you see the other predators. Please don't believe that because there's dolphins there, sharks aren't there. There isn't this war being waged between them that when the dolphins move in, the sharks evacuate. They're all chasing the same thing, right? If you're at a wedding and the buffet opens, you know where people are going, and it's everybody from the wedding is going to the same spot at the same time. And so be aware. Again, dawn and dusk. Don't splash around too much. Don't swim by yourself. If you're keeping those guidelines in mind, which are widely accepted by the shark community, or the shark research community, as the best ways to avoid it, you're most likely going to be okay. And if you have a bad day, if you look at the dozen or so incidents that we've seen in the last 2 summers, overwhelmingly what you hear from the people who are actually bitten is, what are you going to do tomorrow? Well, I'm going back to the beach. Will this stop you from surfing? No. Is this going to change your behavior? Overwhelmingly, they say no. And just be aware, the more time you spend in the water, the greater risk of an encounter. The more encounters, the more risk that it's a negative one. But overwhelmingly, the millions and millions of bathers. I saw the numbers, it was like 10 million people used Jones Beach last year.
Wow.
That's crazy. And, I don't know to what extent they went in, but most people don't go in once. You go in the morning, you get a little hot, you go in again. Repeated visits by so many people, and we're talking about numbers in the single digits, just breaking into 2 digits. And, we haven't had a shark fatality in New York ever. Mm-hmm. So those things, I think, speak volumes to it's okay to access the resource. Do it wisely. You go to Yellowstone, not to try and pet the bison. You don't chase the grizzly bear. Just keep in mind that this is their habitat. And I love this article from 1888 in the New York Times where they say the Great South Bay is infested with sharks. I'm sure if you spoke to a shark, they'd say it was getting infested with humans. Realistically, it's all about perspective. And just bear in mind that we are using their world. We're there for recreation. They're there out of necessity. They don't have a choice. And so let's play nice in the sandbox.
Thank you both. Wonderful episode, and thanks for educating us all.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It's been fun.
Thank you.